Story 1. I got completely drunk at a party in high school. According to my friends, I walked across the street into a cornfield to be sick. In the morning, I woke up to the sounds of birds chirping and needed to use the restroom. I walked back across the street to my friend's house to use the bathroom, and just 2 minutes later, a giant combine came through harvesting the corn. Story 2. On November 30th, 1979, in Big Sur, California, I was run over by a drunk driver while riding my motorcycle and left for dead. It took 20 minutes for the next car to arrive. My left leg was completely severed, and it took 2 hours to reach the hospital. My belt saved my life, but for a while I didn't think I was going to make it. Story 3. I woke up one morning last year, slowly got up, and made my usual trip to the bathroom. I felt a little dizzy, and as soon as I got there, I knew I was going to faint. Story 4. I fell 30 feet while hiking in Utah and broke my back with an L1 compression fracture. I tore my hamstring, had a concussion, and split my head open, requiring 7 staples in my scalp. When I hit the ground, I was relieved to be able to move my arms and legs, but I couldn't get up due to severe back pain and dizziness. I had to be rescued by search and rescue climbers, for which I am very thankful, and I spent 2 nights in the hospital. No surgery was required, and I feel lucky to be alive. I experienced a complete sense of calmness and detachment when I realized I couldn't cling to the cliff any longer. I was talking aloud to myself, trying to minimize my injuries by sliding rather than free falling. Once I landed, I did a self-evaluation to check my injuries and scooted into the shade to avoid overheating. Overall, I recovered well and never felt depressed about the incident, which surprised me. I'm not sure why this was my experience, as I am not a spiritual person. I had Mohs surgery 8 months ago and have been feeling depressed and anxious ever since. My hiking accident occurred 7 years ago, and I managed fine until now. This situation has impacted me considerably. The experience felt intense, and I am really struggling. Story 5. I overdosed on medications long ago, woke up, and read in the news about responders who found a dead man and brought him back to life. Every time I read about a celebrity found dead, I feel like I know exactly what that was like. The doctor said I was very lucky to have good friends. Story 6. I was in the hospital with severe abdominal pain. Then the pain felt like an organ had ruptured. I was trying to tell the doctors that an organ had burst, but they didn't believe me. 12 hours passed, and I started to crash. They took me to emergency surgery. Turned out I had gangrenous appendicitis. The way the organ ruptured was on the side, so it didn't show on the CT scan. I guess gangrenous organs also don't show up. I've never felt so helpless as I did in the hospital trying to tell someone that something was very wrong, and no one believed me. Story 7. I have had a few unfortunate experiences. I encountered several close calls with my severe food allergy, got lost in the mountains while snowboarding at the age of 8, and almost froze to death. I also had an appendicitis that required emergency surgery, experienced a serious car accident, and faced some intense struggles with dark thoughts. Story 8. I crawled out of a car window while it was going 75 miles per hour and hung onto the roof at 100 miles per hour, then crawled back in through the sunroof. I did it for the adrenaline and I recorded it. Looking back, it seems pretty reckless, but I was athletic and felt invincible. One slight movement of the wheel, and I might not be here typing this now. I only did it because I truly trusted the driver. Story 9. A year and a half ago, I had large blood clots that started in my leg and traveled to both of my lungs. When I arrived at the emergency room due to intense chest and back pain, they informed me that if I had waited to come in, I could have been dead within an hour. Story 10. I was biking without a helmet at a fairly high speed when I hit something on the pavement, which turned out to be partially paved train tracks. The bike flipped 180 degrees, launching me forward into a crane truck parked by the road, where a metal stabilizer was headed straight for my face. During that moment, time seemed to slow down, and I thought to myself, if I hit that with my head, I'm going to die. I managed to turn my head just in time and slammed my shoulder into the stabilizer. I ended up with a nasty bruise on my shoulder for a few weeks and a badly scraped knee, both of which still ache on rainy days. Thankfully, I got out alive. I have always worn a helmet since that day. Always wear your helmet. Story 11. I have a weight-rated suspension drop noose in my basement. It is tied and secured properly. I have a note for the police who arrive and a performatted email to my family explaining why I did it. Right now, I am taking it day by day, but I feel the end is very close. Story 12. I have a mental illness. Before I was stable, I ramped over a small bridge, hit a pole, and ended up upside down. Another time, I was walking somewhere I shouldn't have been, but I had no idea where I was. A car full of men pulled up. I went to the passenger door, and one of them brandished a big knife. I walked away. I still don't know how I got out of that. There have been so many instances. I can't even list them all. I feel like I have 9 lives. I'm probably on 8. Story 13. On a train bridge across a large river, trains approached from both directions, and we had to dive into the shrubbery to avoid them. We were foolish teenagers back then. Story 14. Performing cardiopulmonary resuscitation on a victim of a shooter in the parking lot, while the shooter was still attacking people inside. He enjoyed shooting at various objects, including computers, doors, and windows. Story 15. I was pulling a cat out from between a wall and a cupboard. As I pulled her out, I looked between and saw a Sydney funnel web spider. My hand was inches away from it. I didn't have my phone on me, and there was no one around to hear if I yelled out. If that spider had bitten me, I would have been dead in 15 minutes. Even if I had my phone, the closest hospital was 30 to 45 minutes away. For more context, I live in Victoria, Australia. I've compared photos of both the Victorian spider and the Sydney spider. The Sydney spider is more red and larger, which is what I saw. Not to mention, the Victorian spider is more commonly found from Melbourne east and south. I live southwest, so the chances of a Victorian spider being here are slim to none. Story 16. When I was a lifeguard, lightning struck not more than 5 or 6 feet away from me. I was literally blinded and deafened for about a minute before I regained my composure. If the lightning hadn't threatened me, I honestly felt as if I was going to have a heart attack in that moment. It genuinely rattled me. Story 17. A retained placenta discovered 2 weeks after giving birth resulted in uncontrollable hemorrhaging. I lost a significant amount of blood over the course of 3 to 4 days in the hospital and didn't think I would be going home. Story 18. Set on fire by my father, resulting in significant skin loss. I nearly died from the cold while homeless, weighing only 37 kilograms. I experienced an asthma attack while having COVID-19. Story 19. I took a misstep at the top of my staircase to the basement and fell backward. I managed to catch my right arm in the door jamb and was an inch away from rolling down the wooden staircase. I was also in a car accident where, had I not worn my seatbelt, I would have been ejected through the windshield at 45 miles per hour. Story 20. I almost drowned in a river after being caught in an eddy when my boat flipped. I was underwater for at least 3 to 4 minutes, getting tossed around by the currents. I could see the sunlight glistening through the water, but I was so far down that I couldn't break free from the undertow. I was being pulled back and forth in the same 10-foot stretch of the riverbed. It wasn't until I felt myself starting to relax and my lungs burning that I managed to push off the large rock I was heading toward. I was certain I would have drowned there. This gave me enough strength to escape the undertow and swim to the surface. I swam to the side until I could grab onto a rock and coughed up a lot of water from my lungs. I sat there for a few minutes holding onto the rock before swimming to the riverbank. Story 21. Having an artery 99% clogged and not knowing I was having a heart attack. I didn't have any of the symptoms. I just didn't feel right. Story 22. A semi-truck totaled my family's expedition about 15 years ago. I was in the back right seat, and the police who first arrived said that if I had been sitting in the left seat, I would have been seriously injured. Story 23. I nearly took my life on Saturday. Depression had full control. I put my little one to bed and said farewell. Luckily, I picked up the phone instead of a knife. That was the second time in 2 weeks. I feel deep self-hatred and dissatisfaction with my life. Story 24. I was hit by a car when I was 10 or 11 while riding my bike. I broke my leg and survived because of my helmet, which cracked instead of my skull. Story 25. I once accidentally blew up my room in high school. There was a time when a man under the influence threatened to harm my mom and me on the street, and there were also a few occasions when I almost got run over. Story 26. I was caught in a riptide off the coast of Morocco and saw my life pass before my eyes while struggling in the waves. Story 27. I fainted while in the hospital after surgery and woke up to a nurse performing chest compressions with one hand while reaching for the code button with the other. Felt like a glitch in the Matrix. One moment, she was helping me wash my hands in the bathroom, and the next, I was back in bed. My heart and spinal nerves experienced a complication a few days after spinal cord surgery. I spent 4 days in the intensive care unit. 0 out of 10 do not recommend. I am still traumatized 8 years later. Story 28. I nearly bled to death. I only realized I was in big trouble when I couldn't remain upright without holding on to something. I didn't feel any pain, just very lightheaded, and I wanted to go to sleep. I knew if I went back to bed, I would never wake up. I went to the hospital and woke up in intensive care. The doctors told me later that they usually don't see patients like me because they go back to bed. One other woman who was bleeding came into the emergency department that day. We both ended up in intensive care. That day changed everything. I changed my job and began the journey to where I am today. I rarely feel afraid anymore. Story 29. I have survived cancer, suicidal thoughts to the point of self-harm, and I had a nice suit ready to say goodbye. I have survived a car crash that made the vehicle flip twice. I have overcome addiction and the challenges of being raised in a Catholic environment. The closest I have been to dying was 7 months ago when my wife wanted to end our marriage and started the divorce process. Heartbreak and self-loathing have made healing difficult ever since. Every day I think about ending it all, but I have learned compassion, and I am doing better than I was 90 days ago. I feel that in another 90 days, I will be in an even better place. However, going to sleep is hard when panic attacks make me feel like I am having a heart attack multiple times a day. I am better now, but the dread of feeling like I was going to die at any moment was the closest I can imagine to experiencing death without actually dying. Story 30. I almost drowned when I was little. A family river float went wrong. We were all tied together, and a couple of the rafts flipped, trapping us underneath. Everyone made it out, and we never went floating again. Story 31. I have been shot at twice. I have been stabbed twice. I was in a Jeep that rolled over 3.5 times. I once nearly drowned. I had an adverse reaction to medication and lost consciousness while driving on the highway at 70 miles per hour at night. I came to idling in the grass on the side of the road. I am not sure if those count, but they feel significant. If I interpret closest to death a bit differently, I would also include holding someone as they bled to death and witnessing a man die. If I start this, I will be here all night. I have seen too many people dead or die. Story 32. Not me, but my brother. We were in Breckenridge, and he got COVID and then kept complaining he couldn't catch his breath. An intensive care unit doctor basically told him to get his skis and toughen up. My husband, a cardiologist, told me there's no reason a healthy 35-year-old should be short of breath, even with COVID and at altitude. I bought a pulse oximeter at the drugstore, and his oxygen saturation was 51. The only reason he was still alive was that he was a healthy young person. Otherwise, I'm convinced he would have gone into cardiac arrest. The ride to the hospital was the craziest I've ever driven. Fortunately, it was more due to altitude than to COVID. Once he was transported to Denver, he turned around and did fine. Story 33. When I was an infant, I swallowed a needle. I was fortunate that it had a small ball on one end, so it passed through my throat without causing any harm. However, I often wish I had died that day. Story 34. I succumbed to my intrusive thoughts and grabbed a moving bus while crossing a road in a heavily trafficked area. It swept me off my feet, and I landed far too close to the path of the rear wheel, which brushed against my pinky as I scrambled away. Story 35. I had a seizure after overdosing on sleeping pills on an empty stomach while feeling exhausted, lonely, and depressed. Story 36. I was septic with E. coli and spent 4 days in the hospital. Doctors said that if I had waited a few more days to get help, I could have been in serious condition. I went in when I was running a fever of 104.1 degrees Fahrenheit after being sick on and off for about 3 weeks with flu-like symptoms, and I had no idea. Story 37. When my kidneys failed after a hospital treated me with too many medications, I went into a coma for a week. Story 38. I have faced numerous life-threatening situations throughout my life, including surviving a near-fatal car accident on an unfinished freeway, avoiding a collision with a sailboat during a severe storm, being targeted in a shooting incident while walking with a companion, defending against a dog attack, narrowly escaping drowning after being swept out to sea, enduring a robbery experience involving firearms, evading an attack by an individual under the influence, avoiding electrocution when a power line fell, escaping a potential explosion, being trapped in a vehicle buried under several feet of snow, finding myself in the midst of a standoff, narrowly avoiding crossfire. These experiences have taught me resilience, adaptability, and the importance of appreciating life. Story 39. Placental abruption occurred, leading to partial and then full bleeding. My blood pressure dropped, necessitating an emergency cesarean section, almost without anesthesia. Thankfully, they were able to anesthetize me right before the procedure began. I am alive, and remarkably, so is the baby. My understanding is that the baby had mere seconds to live, and I had only a couple of minutes at most. The odds were against us. We should not be alive. Story 40. When I was born, the umbilical cord was disconnected, and they had to perform an emergency cesarean section to save my mother. My father had to make the decision. Fortunately, I was fine, and the doctor said that if they had arrived a few minutes later, I would not be here. I also almost drowned a couple of times when I was younger, so I didn't learn how to swim until I was 18. Story 41. I suffered a severe laceration on the side of my leg, starting just below my knee and extending down my shin to my ankle. It took multiple tourniquets to stem the bleeding and stabilize me for transport to a larger hospital for emergency surgery. Ultimately, I received 8 units of blood during the process and nearly needed a 9th. Story 42. Mom, my brother, and I experienced the 5.6 magnitude earthquake in Popayán, Colombia, in 1983 while visiting family for Holy Week. We woke up early to go to town and were having breakfast when it hit. We made it outside and it was surreal. Many houses in the street were destroyed. I remember hearing about a church that had collapsed on top of worshippers. It was total chaos. The near-death part occurred when we returned to our room on the 3rd floor to get our belongings. A huge chunk of the roof and a brick wall had fallen directly on the bed where we had slept. If we hadn't gotten up early or if the earthquake had struck overnight, there was no way the 3 of us would have survived. The only aspect that makes me laugh about that experience is that even to this day, many people, including my mom, believe that the earthquake happened because the afternoon before, during a holy procession, one of the saints lost her robe. People noticed that it was half a statue attached to a stool, finding it amusing and laughing. So, evidently, God punished the town for laughing at a saint. Religious indoctrination is no joke when it comes to the poor and uneducated. Story 43. I went on a white water rafting tour in Costa Rica. I don't remember the classification, but it was a large operation aimed at Americans, with plenty of rafts carrying families down the river. Towards the end of the tour, the current picked up, and our guide instructed us that regardless of what happened in the next minute, if any of us fell out, we should stay to the right of the river, as if we could control that. Suddenly, I fell off the side and couldn't stay to the right of the river. I saw other guides in kayaks start to panic, and someone on shore was yelling at me in Spanish. Next thing I knew, I went over a small, approximately 4-foot waterfall. About 15 seconds later, I was still underwater, even with a life jacket on. I kicked my legs down, but they didn't reach the bottom. I was stuck in a little whirlpool under the waterfall. After another 5 seconds or so, something hard hit my hand. It turned out to be a kayak paddle that someone had jammed down for me to grab onto. It was enough to pull me out of the current, and I surfaced to find about 15 faces staring at me in shock. I made it back to my raft, trying to laugh it off, but no one was laughing. Story 44. Do medical complications with anesthesia count? I have malignant hyperthermia, which means I would get dangerously hot very quickly if I received certain anesthesia for a medical operation. As a child, I had to undergo dental work that required sedation, and they almost administered the wrong medication. I could have suffered a severe fever and potentially died on the operating table. With this condition, it takes very little to cause a reaction, meaning I usually have to schedule surgery early in the day to avoid the risk of receiving the wrong medication. Even residue from the wrong medication could be fatal. Being booked late in the day once was very concerning. It was supposed to be a simple procedure performed by students, but the student greeted me by saying, "Hi, I'm new here. I and the other students will take care of you. The supervising doctor hasn't arrived yet, but we will get you started while he prepares." I nearly left the operating room out of fear because they were trying to reassure me that my condition was hypothermia, not hyperthermia, which did not inspire confidence that they understood what was going on. I refused treatment until the other doctor arrived. As a child, I was terrified of not being taken seriously. My mom was already out of sight, so I just had to hope I wouldn't be restrained and labeled as a stubborn kid, as had happened before for a different reason when I was around 10. The doctor apologized to me upon his arrival and dismissed the student who had argued with me. I don't know if the student returned once I was properly sedated, but I like to think she did not. Additionally, those of you who can receive anesthesia orally and inhale it do not realize how fortunate you are. Mine must be injected, and it is very warm. It burns, so remaining calm in a hospital setting is quite challenging for me. I am also apparently resistant to sedation, so I can usually count to about 30 before falling asleep. This is quite a risk, as it feels like I'm becoming a human microwave due to the anesthesia. Story 45. According to the tow truck driver, my truck high-centered about a foot short of sliding off the side of a mountain road. Story 46. Multiple times, I couldn't remember which one was closest. One time, I fell on the asphalt, and a truck drove by close to my head. If the truck had been any nearer, it could have crushed my skull. I was swimming during high tide at a beach during COVID-19 when almost nobody was there. A kind surfer saved my life. If he hadn't been there, I would have probably become fish feed. Story 47. I can share a few details about my childbirth experiences. I almost died during a miscarriage and after childbirth. I hemorrhaged while experiencing the miscarriage. I had a missed miscarriage at 15 weeks, and because I was so far along, the pain was unbearable. I was filling a pad within minutes and had to call paramedics to take me to the hospital. They administered so many medications in such a short amount of time that I have no idea how I survived, including fentanyl, morphine, Dilaudid, and ketamine within a 6-hour time frame. When I had my daughter, I was in labor for 4 days before delivering her. I was admitted to the hospital on day 3 and labored for another 24 hours before needing an emergency cesarean section. The frustrating part is that if I hadn't had a scheduled induction for the following day, they would have sent me home again. I hemorrhaged twice. The first hemorrhage was due to prolonged labor, which caused my uterus to become lazy and not contract properly. The second hemorrhage occurred because I had a major artery incorrectly attached to my uterus instead of one of my ovaries. During my 8-week checkup, my nurse practitioner informed me that I was moments away from experiencing systemic bleeding. My body was under immense stress and lacked sleep due to the prolonged labor. I underwent 3 surgeries within 3 hours. I remember waking up during my second surgery, and one of my nurses asked the doctor if I was going to survive. He didn't think I would. Then she inquired about what he would tell my family. I felt completely at peace with whatever happened, knowing that my daughter would be taken care of. Story 48. I crashed into a pile of bricks. Luckily, my motorcycle was hit sideways, and I didn't collide directly with the bricks. Story 49. At birth, I almost took my mom with me. At 4 years old, while recovering from a fever of 43 degrees Celsius, I turned a little too pale, my lips began to turn blue, and my eyes went blank. Story 50. Taking cough and cold medicine, little red candies that tasted like sugar, I took all 16, waited 45 minutes, yawned a lot, and experienced a trip for 6 hours. I did this frequently. My friend's girlfriend called me once and warned, "You can overdose." I had done it myself while he was at home, and every time we did it, there were no problems. But when his girlfriend mentioned those words, I was in bed with my eyes closed, experiencing black and white flashes and thinking, "I think I'm dying." My heart slowed down with my breathing. I had to rely on my higher power to survive. I was pretty sure I almost overdosed, and that was scary. I've been drunk and covered in vomit, waking up many times. I pray to God and thank Him every day that I'm alive. Being outside next to a fire or in a warm jacuzzi all day feels like home. The woman I'm in love with is somewhere else, but I'm doing my best to live. I'm 33, and I started taking cough medicine to get high when I was around 18. They changed the recipe, so good luck. Story 51. When I am on a road trip, I use the pilot assist feature. As a result, the car went straight into the motorway guardrail, 12 meters from the cliff, and suddenly the seat belt automatically tightened to the point of causing rib pain. Luckily, I did not die. Story 52. Either I was dangling off the edge of the third-floor balcony when I was 3 years old, or I was within 6 inches of getting hit by a city bus at 23. Which one is closer? Story 53. When I was a teenager, I temporarily lived with my grandparents for my freshman year. They allowed me to stay in the camper on their farm, which I thought was incredibly cool. It got quite cold, though. One night, I felt hot and tossed the feather bed off me onto a space heater. The feathers smoldered and filled the camper with smoke. I woke up coughing and gasping for air, unaware of my situation. I opened a window above my bed and placed my face against the screen to get some air. After a minute, I felt good enough to rest my head back on the pillow. I immediately started coughing again. At that point, I realized something was wrong and found the feather bed burning. I picked it up and threw it on the lawn. Unfortunately, I ruined their camper trailer with burnt feather smoke. Story 54. On Tuesday, October 29th, 2024, I woke up from an 8-day bender. I literally thought I was going to die that day. I have been sober ever since. Story 55. A man was coming straight at me, going the wrong way down the road. I was lucky he hit the guardrail. Story 56. I had pneumonia as a child, but because my mother worked as an intensive care unit nurse, we were never sick enough to go to the doctor. I'm pretty sure you know the rest, but I did not die. Obviously. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.